Hi, I'm Henk Akkermans and this is Winfried Peters, and at this fireside chat we discuss the collaborative planning case at Philips Electronics. Winfried, first question. Could you describe briefly your position in this company at the time of the events that we investigated?
So in the year 2000, Philips Electronics had a number of divisions. One of those divisions was Philips Components, and that division basically made modules of, which were built upon components which were built into one module for specific purposes. And one of those groups was Philips Optical Storage, which was creating drive mechanisms for CD recordable and CD writable at that time. In that group I was responsible for the integral supply chain worldwide, so driving basically the complete supply chain from the suppliers until the customers.
How was market conditions at that time for this business of optical storage?
Yeah, this was basically the breakthrough moment for when we changed from CDs which were just playback to introducing CDs which were recordable. It started with single recordable, but quickly behind that became the rewritable versions. And what we saw is that this was quickly exploding in the market. One side, because in every PC people wanted to have a recordable medium like this, very cheap, mass storage. But also the copying of audio in the audio world was climbing quickly. So the demand was climbing very fast in those years, but also the versions which needed to be provided were quickly changing. We had all kind of speed developments in those type of things. The first products did only 2x, which means that you need half an hour for a CD. In the end it was 50x, which was basically 2 minutes. Those generations followed each other very quickly, 3 months, 4 months, next generation, new type, and going forward. In the meantime, apart from that technology development, the volumes were increasing, and therefore, yeah, it was quite a demanding environment.
What was the role of your company, Components, at that time in this market?
Now, Philips was one of the leaders in this market. We were one of the first to have the technology ready to do this. So we were very much in the lead of driving this volume ramp up and also the technology base. Of course, there were the natural competitors of Philips in the same market, which is Sony, but also companies like LG Electronics and Lighton quickly joined this field of
Okay, could you say something about the performance of this supply chain for Philips Components prior to the project that we discussed about, so late 1990s?
Yeah, when I entered into the job, one of the very first things I was confronted with, that they just had launched and stopped the first generation, so the 2X version of the CDR, and while they did that, they immediately started an enormous debate between optical storage and the semiconductor supplier, which was an internal Philips division as well, about the obsolescence they had created by doing that. So the product was already stopped in the market and in the stores of components, but also the stores of the semiconductor group. There was a huge amount of chips still waiting to be produced. But as I told you about the speed race, so in the meantime the market was asking for 4x and no longer 2x, and that needed a different chip. So big debate about how this huge amount of chips was basically created and who was responsible for getting that amount of stock there in place. And we talk really about millions of dollars here. So it was not something we could wave away. And what became clear for me is that this problem would probably be repeated even at larger scale as the ramp-up would continue.
Yeah, what were the root causes for this obsolescence, apart from the fact that there was a new generation?
Well, one of the things when I started digging in is that we were still getting product supplied at the moment. We were already phasing out the product. So we got chips still coming in and still sitting in the pipeline coming to us. And while we were already phasing out the product. So somehow the coordination between what was happening in the market and the driving of the production of these chips was disconnected.
What did this do for the buyer-supplier relationship between semiconductor and components?
I've seen a lot of red hats and a lot of noise on the phone in these days. It really didn't help, because in this type of market you need to cooperate very closely also in technical specs, and so the match between the system builders and the chip builders has to be very tight. And therefore you need a lot of trust to be able to do that. And this was really jeopardizing the relationship.
On both sides?
On both sides, people get very angry because this was really millions of dollars.
How about the information sharing, the transparency of the supply chain at that time?
Oh, that was a big mystery, because it took me weeks and weeks to dig out, say, why certain orders were started and not started, and who decided that, and where does it go. But let me give you an example about the delay of information in these chains. I calculated that the information we were giving from the demand of the market to our factory, say back into the chip maker, was passing 7 different stages. So there were 7 people in the chain who got that information, had to do something with it, and pass it on to the next thing. And that's in one company.
Yeah.
So, and you think, how can that be? No, very simple. You have the market changes with us, then it goes to our guys internally who plan the factory. Do they believe the market guys? No, not really, so they wait another week to do something with it. If they finally do something, then they supply that to the regional marketing person of the chip guy. Then the regional marketing adds it up, but maybe a week later. Then gives it back to central planning. Central planning, is that true? Wait another week. And in the end, it takes 7 to 8 weeks basically before a change in the market would ripple through into a change in production side.
Yeah.
Now, and if you then realize that the product is living only 3 months, and then you lose already 8 weeks here. Another issue, of course, is that the lead time of processing these chips takes 13 to 14 weeks, which roughly is the 3 months. So if you add up the 8 weeks and the 3 months lead time, then you can see the problem already.
So what did you do?
Scratch my head, but that became sore after some time. So we started talking to, I went into the semiconductor group and tried to find somebody who was understanding their own supply chain very well, but also had, say, the possibilities to think a bit on a higher level, and so could take some advice. Now, when I started looking for that person, I found that person, and that person was already busy with this puzzle. So we basically created a handshake there, and his name is Erik van Lachem, and basically said, if we two together now join forces, then we might be able to come to a different solution. Yeah, and a solution like this is the market is fast and quick, then you need to create one, transparency in the chain, and the other one is try to connect information of the market as quick as possible to the point of inflection. And that is what we try to do.
So how did that come about? It wasn't at the snap of a finger, actually.
No, not at all, because there were basically no concepts available. There was no tools available which could do this. But most of all, there was no workway how this should happen and how it should be done. So in the beginning, we spent quite some time, I think, with hindsight, too much time, in exploring, say, what could be done, how it could be set up, and what kind of tooling you would need, and all these stuff. I think in the end, we probably explored too many lanes. There were also, say, quite a heavy lot of consultants involved, probably too many. But in the end, we basically came to a resolution. We used a quite innovative type of calculation tool for the chain calculations, which allowed us to quickly calculate chains. And we had to find a way to set up a whole communication and synchronizing mechanism throughout a large part of the chain which was spread out over the world.
Now you mentioned that the trust and transparency on both sides were pretty low. How did you get people to this kind of process that you're describing requires lots of transparency and trust, I suppose, because you're really synchronized. How did you achieve that change then?
Yeah, the people were of course extremely skeptical when we started talking about this, that we would have one chain, one command, and everybody in the same boat, and managing all this as one chain. There were a lot of hurdles to bypass. One of the hurdles was of course the planners themselves. In a traditional way of planning, planners have their own little world. They make their own interpretation of the world. They're built in their buffers and all these type of things. Now, in this type of approach, a planner would have to give totally transparency of what he's doing and what the real numbers are and all these type of things. This is quite unusual, although it sounds strange, but it is quite unusual. So the only way to circumvent is that we have started in a corner which we have talked into a little pilot. And basically by building up that pilot, we have been creating, say, at least the content trust of that what we were doing could work.
So there was a pilot of a subset of everything that needed to be done?
Yeah, so there were many chips involved, so we didn't pick them all. We just picked one chip and one assembly, which was difficult to predict, the one with the longest lead time. And we basically built that pilot around that thing. Also the tool was developed around that pilot. And we used the pilot to convince ourselves, but also say that the planners involved that this could really work.
And what did that pilot itself do to the trust and transparency on both sides?
Well, at that moment you could convince a number of planners that these things would work and that the response was okay. There's another issue there, which in this type of transparency you want to do is you have to organize, and that is getting the liability sorted. Because if you take shared decisions, then basically who's owning the result and who's going to pay for the mistakes.
Yeah.
In the traditional way, that's a negotiation game between the supplier and the customer. But in this case, we had only one supply chain, so that separation was no longer possible. And we had, therefore, to create a Solomon solution to say, what are we going to do with liability? So we worked the higher levels of the company and to say, yeah, this is important, we need to shorten these cycles. And we told them the only way to do that is to share the future. And therefore we came to a resolution that we would share the liability of what was going to happen. So 50-50 for both. Now, that was not an easy game. There were a lot of people saying this is the wrong division, it should be 80-20 or 20-80, because especially the semiconductor groups, there were quite some opposition to this 50-50. But in the end everybody accepted that. And that took away a lot of the politics out of the planner communication, which was extremely important to do.
So, how about business results after this pilot had taken off and has been expanded?
Yeah, so the pilot was still a very simple case. We had to expand that pilot into the full set. But that required, say, bringing in a new party, which so far we didn't talk about. If you look to the setup of such a supply chain, and you have the chip producer, then the chips go to a guy who assembles PCBs, so an EMS company, or a group which puts chips on flex and puts them into certain modules, which then go into the Philips optical storage factory to become the CD recordable device.
So the EMS is what other industries call the contract manufacturers, an outside supplier.
The PCB board stuffer. And they were outsiders, and basically they had their own little regime. And in the practice, they were buying the chips from the semiconductor division, and they sold us the say stuffed boards or the mounted flexes. And of course, as they were an outsider to the Philips company, the liability in the negotiation between semiconductors and these contract manufacturers was pushed to the contract manufacturers. They were forced to put 15 weeks of orders in. So the full lead time of the pipe. And by doing that, of course, the liability of some of the rigs was at the contract manufacturer. But the contract manufacturer uses, of course, the forecast of the storage. And if they buy on their forecast, they still hold Philips Optical Storage liable for that stock. So it was a kind of a fake game which didn't help Philips at all, because basically we still had to pay for that stock. Now, we needed to be able to steer this chain, we needed transparency what was in semiconductors, what was happening at this contract manufacturer, and what was happening at our factory. So we had to find a game how we could use the contract manufacturer to help us to create that transparency. Now the way we did that is by offering them, say, 2 weeks lead time instead of 15. And but the condition was that they had to order what we told them. So we would take care of that. That is something the contract manufacturer is new to. But the change between 15 weeks and 2 weeks was so attractive that they did it. And from then onwards we could organize a weekly cycle where everybody was submitting his data on an exact point in the week at a specific time on the day, so that we would be able to aggregate the numbers.
What data do you mean?
We need data like what was shipped out, what was received, and how much was the stock. Now, of course, you can think you can synchronize it properly. Now, that is quite difficult. So we asked them not just one shipment, we asked them the latest 3 shipments and the latest 3 receipts and everything. So that you could synchronize, hey, this one I've seen already, the other one I didn't see. So you could basically build up a full transparent supply chain from those data, and we did that every week. And based on the latest market info, we basically were then able to steer this chain. And basically there was only one point to be decided: is how many chips we start, and basically how much chips should the contract manufacturers order. And by doing that, we could steer this flow. Yeah. You were asking what was the result of it in terms of business. We were growing like mushrooms, I would say. Very fast in those 2 years coming there, and we were just in time with having this ready. So we were capable of ramping through the different generations of 4X, 8X, 16X, 32X with very limited levels of obsolescence in the chips. Because the chain was much shorter because the market info was going directly to chip start, but also there was no gaming in the chain, and therefore there was no let's say extra obsolescence in the chain than needed. So this was a big success.
Okay, wonderful story. If you now look back upon this now almost 10 years later, are there things that you think I would have done differently? Or things you say, well, it's very good that we did that, those are really the root causes for the success?
Probably the convincing process would have probably been similar. This is not an easy option. I've also in the last 10 years didn't see any other example where this was basically so well done in terms of creating that trust in the chain. The
convincing process, you mean by step taking these planners and then doing the pilots?
Yeah, I think we talked too long in the start of this project. I think we could have done the pilots earlier and quicker. Because I still remember we started those things not already before the tools were ready. We could do that already basically on a shared spreadsheet. And that was basically the start, kind of a breakthrough when the trust started building that this was the right way of doing it. So I think that would have been probably a faster way to get it in. But that is with hindsight, if you know how a process like this runs.
So you could have started with the spreadsheet rather than with the advanced tooling, simply to get the process of trust and information sharing going.
Yeah, but I think still it would have been a major effort if we wouldn't have the tool in the end. If you would look at the magnitude of the number of chips involved, it was more than 35 different chips in all kinds of different combinations. That would have been a nightmare on a not advanced tool. But the development of the tool and the creation of the trust could have been more parallel. And I think that is So we built too long on the tool before we really start doing something. And that was also, you run the risk, if the market is even more dynamic, that the market is already gone before you're ready with making your tools. And that is of course a risk which certainly in the accelerated markets as we see today happening, it might easily be the case.
So this was a great success, business-wise, organization-wise, innovation-wise, and yet it has not often been repeated, as you indicated. What do you think were the key reasons why it did work so well here?
There are a number of things. One is a very structural one, is that you need strategic alliance between two partners to do this. You need a unifying purpose. Groups need to go basically really into the same direction. If that is not the case, then because the implementation of these things takes quite a while, and you have to commit rather deeply into each other in certain terms to make that happen. Now, and I've found that it is not that often that a component supplier and a module of a product maker are really having the same purpose. So that is really an issue. The second thing is you need, of course, people in the supply chain who get enough room to maneuver and have enough trust of their business management to basically start doing this game. Because this is a supply chain with a lot of money in it. And to deviate from the traditional bargaining positions, you need a lot of trust from your management and from your purchasing management to be able to get that room to maneuver. And I think the combination of the two is making it difficult.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Nou, doet het gewoon tijd.
Ja.